Have you ever noticed how each generation creates its ideals largely in opposition to the standards of the previous generation? In the history of music, we've seen this tendency over and over again, generating movements like the Ars Nova, the Reformation and Counter-Reformation, and the first and second practices of the early Baroque. This reaction occurs in the 18th century between Baroque and classical music styles. Take, for instance, melody in the Baroque period compared with the classical period. The melodies of Bach and Handel and Rameau spin on, often without recognizable stopping points. Instead of ending a melodic phrase on a cadence, the Baroque composer was inclined to elide the end of one phrase with the beginning of the next, so that you hardly get a breathing space until the end of the movement. Melodic phrasing in classical era music takes a complete 180 from that approach. Every melodic phrase seems to move to a focal point and return to rest in predictable four-measure groupings. Sometimes that phrase structure, with its accompanying harmonic cadence, occurs every 5 measures or every 2 measures, but the principle remains the same. Classical music is characterized by frequent, regular cadences. This practice was so widespread, we actually have a name for it. We call it periodicity. I can just hear the up-and-coming musicians of that generation saying, "Enough of this intellectual music. We want something we can sing." Within the music of the classical period itself, duality was found on every level, from the juxtaposition of structural elements to the extreme contrast between the light, polished steel galant and the highly expressive Empfindsamer style. A desire to emulate the classic lines and balanced proportion seen in Greek architecture was reflected in music using the simplest of ideas. A stabilizing descending motion would, as a matter of course, follow a theme that began with an ascending rocket theme. If tension was created using an exciting driving rhythm, then the next movement should provide a release using a slower tempo. Duple meter, balanced triple meter, big crescendos were relieved by sections of softer dynamic. What could be more natural than opposing an opening section in the tonic key against an equal section in the dominant, or a minor section with its relative major? These simple structural devices reflected an equilibrium that was immediately apparent to the listener. And the listener was no longer necessarily an educated member of the aristocracy, but could just as well be part of the burgeoning middle class. The Age of Enlightenment was characterized by a desire to right social injustice. The American and French revolutions were only outward symptoms of a deeper psychological change. Philosophers, scientists, and yes, even musicians like Mozart and Beethoven actively champion personal expression and freedom. The revolt against personal oppression brought an end to absolute monarchy, that idea from an earlier time that kings were all-knowing and all-powerful. It was also reflected in religious change, a turning towards natural religion, where a man stands in personal relation to his God, rather than needing a priest or the church to intercede. The common man was the new champion of the day, and art, music, and literature all courted the new audience. As we work through the next several modules, notice how duality often underlies classical period music, Many of the forms we'll be studying, sonata, symphony, concerto, da capo aria, are based in contrast, contrasting modes and keys, dominant and tonic contrasts, contrasting tempos, and meters. Contrasting timbres, especially in the concerto form, and the balance between tension and release.